Hi everyone, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll get started with our July Council meeting. Welcome back. It's great to have everybody in the same room again. Be able to see you all face to face instead of on the screen for our electronic meetings we've been held in recently. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge traditional owners of the land on which the town of Bassendean was founded. So Nyalak Katij Libya Buja Bal Wajak Nunga Buja Nyalak Mini. So the town of Bassendean was founded on the lands of the Wajak Noongar people. Always was, always will be, and the Wajak people have played a very important part in our history, but also continue to contribute strongly today. And it's now the responsibility of all of us to share in making sure the future of this place has is a positive one. I'd just like to remind everybody that tonight's meeting is being recorded and live streamed in the interest of transparency and also to make council proceedings more accessible to members of our community. First of all, just a couple of announcements. I'm sure everybody in this room is aware that this week is the commencement of our FOGO rollout and the new 3-bin system that incorporates the collection of food organics and garden organics, which Councillor Wilson's looking very pleased about here. I think we're all very pleased. You may be aware that we're only the 4th metropolitan local government that's introduced this service. I think it's something that we as a council and a community can be very proud of. The new service is going to significantly reduce the amount of waste that we send to landfill, which will have a really positive impact on our finances by reducing the amount we pay in the landfill levy over the years to come, but importantly also on our environment. So produce less methane gas by sending all that organic matter to landfill. And also we can recycle it to produce compost for our community, which is really positive. It has required an enormous amount of effort over a long period of time for this rollout to happen. So I just want to thank our fabulous waste team. So we have Bryce Campbell here, who has been leading this, and also Ari, who has been very key to this, but also the waste educators and everyone else who has been supporting them. You've done a really fabulous job, and we really thank you for your efforts. And I think the last couple of days, things have gone particularly smoothly, and that's all thanks to the excellent work that you have been doing behind the scenes. So, considering that we have just been in the middle of a global pandemic and the staff have managed to be able to roll this project out on time, I think that's a really great achievement, and we'd just like to commend you all for your efforts. So thank you very much for that. So moving on the agenda, attendance, apologies and applications for leave of absence. I'd also like to acknowledge tonight that we have Diane, I don't know how to say your surname properly, Depias, who is here from our finance team because of your work with the budget, so thank you. Donna is often not here as well, Donna Shaw, our manager of planning place, and we've got Renee Ma from HR, as well as all of our directors and executive managers. So thank you everybody for being here. Councillor Quinton has given her apologies for tonight. I believe everybody else is present. Are there any councillors who would like to apply at this point for a leave of absence in the coming weeks or months? Great. Okay, we will move on then. So item 4 is declarations of interest. I have a declaration of interest in item 12.4, which is the planning policy relating to Anzac Terrace, which is the property on which I live. So Councillor Hamilton will take over the meeting at that point, and I've submitted my form to the CEO already. Any other declarations of interest from councillors? Okay. So moving on to item 5, which is presentations of deputations. So we have Riley and Ivy Murphy here with us this evening. If you'd like to come forward to the table. They are addressing us on item 12.2, which is the unauthorised works at the property which Ivy and her husband Mike own at 1 River Street. Welcome. Thank you for giving up your evening to come and share with us. As I've spoken to you about this afternoon, you've got up to 10 minutes to share with council. At the end of that time, you don't have to take 10 minutes, take as short an amount of time as you would like, but you have up to 10. And then after that, if you're happy, councillors will offer them the opportunity to ask you any questions. Okay. So, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, councillors. I am Riley Murphy. You're probably quite familiar by now with my parents' property if you've read the Conservation Management Strategy, which was an attachment, I think, on the report provided to the council. It's 1 River Street, Bassendean. It's been an ongoing issue for the town, obviously. So for some of you, the house may have become a daily eyesore that is hurting the image of the area and pulling the property values down as it continues to decay. Maybe for some, the decay represents the gradual loss of a Bassendean icon, you know, a crumbling piece of the very soul of the town you've grown up in and now represent. And for me, it is once again my home, as I've flown back to the nest to complete my PhD studies. It's more or less always been my home though, just as Bassendean has always been my home. So when I was 13, we moved in. All of the rooms stunk of cigarettes. The dirty walls were coloured in medical tertiary colours from its previous life as a mental health hostel. There's a spooky doorway under the stairs and a big red nurse alarm call buttons in each room, and it gave the house a sort of abandoned mental asylum feel. The whole family poured a lot of time and effort into bringing the place up to scratch, changing it from a hostel to a home, and people are often now pleasantly surprised when they step inside the door. I have a lot of precious memories in the house, and I've lived so much of my life there that the stairways and the halls are actually frequently features of my dreams. So it has been sad for me also to see it fall into the current state, particularly over the past few years. I don't want to paint a big sob story, nor do I want to wash our hands of the responsibilities as owners of a heritage listed property. I would, however, like to bring forward some personal context which might help explain some of the decisions and actions my parents have taken that have led to the point that we're at currently. So my family has had a little bit of rough luck and little success in business despite living in Success Hill. Firstly with a print media distribution business which was rapidly and unexpectedly supplanted by the success of the internet, and once again with the current family business which has shrunk massively under the pressures of the COVID-19 pandemic. The success of the internet and the COVID-19 are factors that we could neither control nor predict. So you can imagine the stress that has caused and continues to cause. Money is therefore a very real issue. Additionally, throughout these financial stresses, my parents have continually supported a member of our family who suffers severe and debilitating chronic mental illness. So struggling through these unfamiliar administrative processes has proved too much on more than one occasion. And while dealing with difficult family and financial struggles, within this context, I'd like to examine two items on the officer's report, which I feel perhaps shed light on my parents a little harshly. So first, within the conclusion section of the report states that the landowner knowingly purchased the property which is the subject of a state heritage listing and should have, or at least could have, been aware of the obligations and responsibilities associated with purchasing a heritage property. It certainly is true that they signed off on such a statement confirming that they were aware of the purchase of a heritage property, but I don't think they were made quite aware of the specific duties and limitations that this would entail, and having seen the house during the dry summer period to be in a satisfactory condition, unfortunately thought no further of it, until it began to rain and they noticed water ingress and damage to the western gutters, but they did attempt to remedy this quite soon. So having purchased the house in 2004, in July 2006 they applied for a Heritage Council grant to rectify the issue. It was, however, not selected for further funding in that grant round. So while they may not have performed their due diligence in this respect, I think you should cut them some slack. For who would these days buy a heritage listed property if the full list of restrictions and obligations were laid out before purchase? I know the council is not interested in buying the property. Secondly, the report also noted in the background section that the Heritage Council had extended a very generous offer to my parents in 2007, wherein the Heritage Council would cover 90% of the costs of re-roofing the property. I myself was flabbergasted as to why they would not jump at this clearly exceptional offer. So having only just today found a copy of the offer in question, I can see why they were not particularly enthused, and I have a few copies of the Heritage Council's reply here, so you can see for yourself. It states that no specific offer at all, and it indicated with no certainty whatsoever that funding would be secured. So it's just sort of like any other reply you might receive, whereas we feel like in the report it's painted it as we were on the edge of receiving a 90% coverage of the repairs. So an attempt to obtain a quote from a Heritage Council listed contractor in line with this grant reply was pursued but went unanswered, and in frustration, without any confidence that this grant was worth further pursuing, and following rejection of their grant in the previous year, the process was unfortunately abandoned. So my parents were not being lazy or difficult or looking a gift horse in the mouth. They were time poor and perhaps being realistic about their expectations, given the information provided at the time. But back to the matter at hand. We acknowledge that the council has been very understanding and patient with us so far, and for that we do sincerely thank you. We understand that you all have an interest in bringing out the full historical and aesthetic potential of the house, and of course we want that too, as ultimately it has to look good and it has to not fall over for us to be able to sell it. So we're definitely on board. I ask you now, if you were in my parents' situation, at retirement age, but unable to retire, in possession of a house that demands serious funding to fix, in a climate that has sapped both grants and businesses dry, what would you personally do? Let's talk strategy. I have very recently decided to help guide my parents in matters relating to our house, and I hope that together we can overcome some of the hurdles which have stalled progress so far. I have discussed with them the jobs that we believe we can realistically complete within the time frame of a year and with our current financial situation. So we agree to complete all of the list of items listed in the Conservation Management Strategy under Section 8, Conservation and Maintenance Work Schedules, subsection 7.1.1, listed immediate action, except for items 7 and 8, which address the stabilisation of the veranda. The objection to these works are purely financial. I mean, obviously it's a very important part of the house, both visually and functionally, so the objections are purely financial at this stage, as the quotes we've received to complete this work are prohibitive, ranging from $68,000 to $104,000, and that's for stabilisation. So we realistically and unfortunately cannot obtain that kind of funding at this stage. Temporary emergency stabilisation work has been performed though, and it is of course only a temporary measure. So aside from financial concerns, we do have a practical obstacle in the form of the mains power line to the house. So we'll need underground power to complete the works on the roof and the gutters, and to begin works on the veranda. So in the past we've had contractors who've refused to go anywhere near the eastern section of the roof out of safety concerns with the power line there. And this is because the power line basically attaches to the lip of the roof right at the front of the house. This section of the roof contains the guttering which we believe basically initiated the damage in the first place. And it's caused the damage to the veranda, and we believe is the most critical section to repair. Having that power line there basically prevented us in large part from pruning the large jacaranda tree, which was probably the downfall of the gutter. So, the gutter is the priority. So once we've moved the power connection underground, we agreed to complete work on the roof and gutters. This will mitigate further damage to the veranda as well as the walls. For example, the western wall of the dining room, which is at the moment copping a fair bit of water in the absence of gutters. As for the other works, we have commenced work on the windows and the walls of the dining room, and we're happy to complete these works as well as the termite works. So we did also note a conflict between the Heritage Council's previous recommendation for replacing the authorised roofing. This is outlined also in the report. That is the cause of the council action against my parents and the recommendations of the Conservation Management Strategy. So the original Heritage Council recommendation was to replace the unauthorised work with short sheet galvanised iron, and the current Conservation Management Strategy, which was approved by the Heritage Council, recommends the roof be replaced, what's the word? Be replaced, noting the work already undertaken, metal corrugated long sheets of zinc aluminum should be used to match existing roof. So while long sheets may reduce some of the originality of the roof, it is a more durable and affordable product. And using zinc aluminum compared to the galvanised iron roof may be the difference for us between being able to afford to complete the work on the roof or not. So As a sort of compromise to improve the historic appearance of the roof, we're willing to paint the roof if the council so desires. So, just to finish up, in the interest of getting the ball rolling swiftly and smoothing on these works, we have a few requests. We'd like to know for certain before we begin our development application whether the council expects the roof to be replaced with short sheet tin or whether we should proceed with the Zinc-A-Loom as per the recommendations of the Conservation Management Strategy. The second is the fact that our work is dependent on the installation of underground power. We understand that underground power is being planned for Bassendean and request that the time that is given to us to complete the works listed in the officer's report not begins until we have the underground power. So the time allotted to us to complete these tasks, if possible, work around the underground power issue. And third, we agree to undertake the works outlined in the officer's report within the time frame you decide, but we request that the works pertaining to the veranda be delayed until we can secure a grant or some sort of alternative funding. So I hope that we can get this all sorted. I know it will be a great weight off many people's shoulders to see it completed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, and I appreciate the time you've spent with me over the last few days as well, explaining where you're at. I'm aware that other councillors haven't had the opportunity to ask questions as I have, so are there any questions that councillors would like to ask of Riley or Mrs Murphy? No? Thank you very much for your time. We'll get to your item very soon, but you're welcome to stay and wait for that, or I'm sure the town staff will let you know of the decision after the meeting if you choose to leave. But thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, councillors, just coming back to the agenda. Item 6 is statements by members of the public. So there's none of them this evening, but I would like to, I failed to mention our ranger Damien, who's sitting by the door, so thank you for being here this evening as well. Item 7 is questions from members of the public. We've had a number of questions submitted by people who aren't here this evening. The first one is from Carolyn McGregor of 12 Thompson Street, Bassendean, Thompson Road, sorry. Mrs McGregor asks about the Bassendean report of November last year, and that it was supported by the community's wish for higher densities around all 3 train stations in the town. She has concerns that in the latest Thrive magazine, it would seem that the Mayor, myself, only wants development around 1 station, and that was mentioned twice in the heading in the first lines of the article. So her question is, why is the Mayor, why am I, not supporting the recommendations of the Bassendean report, which has more options for population increases and a greater chance of success? So in answer to Mrs McGregor's question, I would suggest that the Thrive article that's been referred to is talking specifically about the Bassendean Town Centre Master Plan that Council will be developing with the community as a key part of our COVID response. As Mrs McGregor would be aware, Council is currently reviewing our local planning scheme and strategy. And this planning framework will define the density more broadly throughout the entire town. And also, I'd just like to bring Ms McGregor's attention to the fact that the article does state that we're focusing our increased density requirements around our train stations, not just the singular station. There's a claim made in the question, which I believe is a false claim, that myself and councillors are not supporting the recommendations of Bassendean. This is not the case, and I don't believe there's any evidence for this. So both myself and my fellow councillors are committed to realising the vision that's contained within the Bassendean report, and which we formally adopted unanimously late last year. So this commitment is evident by the draft strategic community plan, which is being presented to council later tonight for adoption. Priority area number 3, which is on page 19 of the plan, identifies that one of the key directions for the town is being increased residential population around our train stations. The second question that was asked is why is Mrs McGregor being excluded from high density redevelopment, seemingly out of step with the state government's Metronet plans for all stations. So in response, I'd say that the allocation for increased density will occur as part of the review of our local planning framework. This includes amending the existing local planning strategy and replacement of the existing local planning scheme. As Mrs McGregor is aware, this work is well underway, and it's expected that Council will consider both of these documents in the coming months, after which they'll be put out for public consultation. There was also a long series of questions that were submitted by Mr Don Yates of 10 Thompson Road. The vast majority of these questions had been asked numerous times, so they won't be being addressed in tonight's meeting. One of the questions that was a new question has been included in the agenda, so I won't bother reading that out now because people can access that in the agenda papers. There was another question received which I believe hadn't previously been specifically responded to. This related to item 12.12 on tonight's agenda, the Strategic Community Plan. And the question was, how is the Strategic Community Plan to be aligned to the planned town revitalisation program in both the immediate and the long term? So again, creating a vibrant town centre is a priority for our community, as it again identified through the Bassendean Dream, our future community engagement project. This has also been reflected as a priority in the draft community strategic plan, which we're considering later this evening. And as Mr Yates is aware, last month Council endorsed the development of the Town Centre Master Plan, which is aligned to the Strategic Community Plan. This project is right at the beginning stages. However, over the coming months, there will be opportunity for the community to contribute their views on this project. I'm assuming that there are no further questions from members of the public tonight. Okay. So in that case, we will move on to item 8, which is petitions. I don't believe we've received any. So item 9, councillors, is the confirmation of minutes. So item 9.1 is relation to the ordinary council meeting that was held in June on the 23rd. So officer recommendation 9.1A that the minutes be received. Moved by councillor Barty, seconded by councillor McWilliam. Anybody against? Okay, so that is carried. And 9.1B that they're confirmed as a true record. Can that be moved by councillor Wilson, seconded by councillor Barty? Is there anybody against? That is carried unanimously. There was no business deferred from the previous meeting. So item 11 then is the external committee reports and updates. So we have the EMRC meeting from June 2020, the Walga East Metro Zone minutes from June 2020, and also the State Council meeting of July 2020. Do we have a mover to note those minutes? Councillor McWilliam, seconded councillor Hamilton. Is there anybody against? It is carried unanimously. So councillors, moving on to section 12, which is the reports. First of all, the items that are going to be carried on block. At this point, I have the following coming out of on block. Item 12.2, 12.3, 12.4, 12.5, 12.6, 12.7, 12.10, 12.12, 12.13, 12.14, 12.16, 12.19, 12.21, 13.1, 16.1, 16.2 and 16.3. Are there any other reports that councillors would like taken out of on block? Yes, Councillor Ganger.
Bear with me, Your Worship. Let me just get to it. I just want to check. No, it's all good.
Are you happy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, in that case, do I have a mover for the remainder to be carried on block? Councillor Wilson moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Barty. Is there anybody against? And that is carried unanimously. So councillors, will move on to item 12.2, which is the report that we just received a deputation on from the Murphy family relating to the unauthorised works at One River Street in Bassendean. So firstly, are there any questions for our staff? Councillor Wilson.
Your Worship, information that we just received in the deputation then relating to what appears to be a conflict between advice on what the roofing material should be. Was that known to the staff? And if so, did the staff have a view about the apparent conflict?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, I wasn't aware of that. However, in terms of proceeding with the matter, we would be defaulting to the conservation management strategy as opposed to the advice that occurred before that. But in any event, a development approval would be required, and that would be formalised through that process.
Questions from other councillors? Councillor Hamilton?
Through the Mayor for the staff. In respect to the power line connection, I'm curious about how other heritage properties do maintenance or upgrade their properties with power connections. Is there a perceived issue with doing those works with the existing connection, the way it connects to the building?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The town's not aware of any issue of that nature, and certainly the conservation management strategy doesn't identify it as an issue. Certainly appreciate the comments made by the landowner as that being a potential practical constraint. I suppose in that regard, I'd suggest that the recommendation remains as is, and if the notice is in fact issued by council, it would still have the opportunity to sit down with the owner and Western Power and actually work through that issue and determine whether there's any practical constraints. If there was a justified reason that the works or elements of the works couldn't be practically achieved, obviously staff would take that into account in dealing with the matter going forward. But there doesn't seem to appear to be a reason that would limit council's ability to issue the notice.
Okay. In respect to the application for development approval, do you foresee that as being a lengthy process, or are quotes and plans required for that development application? That's the first question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the quotes wouldn't be required, but certainly there would need to be a competent application compiled, which would include plans. The application, I suggest, would rely heavily on the conservation management strategy, and there's plans contained within that. But it may well be that the actual application would need to be supplemented by further more detailed plans, which would obviously represent a cost to the landowner.
Okay.
But in terms of the first question about it being a lengthy process, I wouldn't envisage it being lengthy so long as the application was complete upon its original lodgement. There would need to be some referrals to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage as well as the Heritage Council, but staff would obviously action those as quickly as possible.
Okay, so perhaps we could do a stage process where, for instance, with one of your recommendations here, that we ask that those plans be submitted and approved by the 1st of September. Then that's followed by the implementation works over a period of time. So perhaps in the officer's recommendation, we could accommodate that sort of recommendation, that there's a first stage where the application and approval for the development is put in and must be done by a certain time. And then we follow that with another phase where there is development. Now, given the comments about the some of the works being able to be done and others can't be done, can I ask the officer's recommendation in this respect? If we, for instance, list these works, but perhaps in an amendment to the officer's recommendation say that if the works are not completed by whatever timeline we put in there, that you bring it back to council for further consideration, would that be appropriate, or do you see problems with that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no particular issue with that, and that could be brought back to council either for a formal decision if one's required, or it could simply be an update to council laws via the bulletin if it was just simply for information. There's no issue with either option, it's just whether a decision is actually required from council. But in terms of keeping council abreast of the issue, there's no problem with that. In terms of the original comment about whether the staff recommendation could be amended to provide a sort of two-tiered approach, there's no issue with that either. Obviously, what staff are looking for through the recommendation, the ultimate resolution, is that genuine attempts are made and reasonable attempts are made by the landowner to rectify the situation. If that needs a bit more time, staff are happy to work with that.
Okay, I guess what I'm getting at is you've mentioned a genuine attempt to actually rectify the problems. So what I'm interested in is how to formulate an amendment into this, which I will work on in a minute, to recognise that if there is a genuine attempt, a certain amount of work has been done, if it hasn't been completed by a certain date, that you come back to us with information. Anyway, Councillor Wilson wants to.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Worship. Following on from Councillor Hamilton's question and her desire to see if an alternative form of wording is possible, is it not open to us to defer the item for another meeting or so to allow such time for those words to be sorted
Yeah,
out?
I had a similar question. So in light of the fact that there's some information about potential conflict between what the Heritage Council's requiring and their breach with the development application, and also some constraints around the underground power and so on, would it be worth town staff having a discussion in the coming month with the Heritage Office and the property owners to come up with a very clear list of what is and what isn't required? For example, one of my concerns is about the veranda. Now clearly that is a very expensive part of the process and may have some dependencies on the underground power. But other than the historical value, there's also the potential that's flagged in the report around it being urgent because of the structural integrity issues, and if that's a safety hazard, that might be something that is an absolute must as opposed to leaving it down the track, and I'd be interested to have the opportunity to explore them before we decide what is and isn't required in the immediate term. Is that, I know that was a very long worded question, my apologies.
If you could clarify the question.
So the question is really around the value in not making a decision about the notice and what it will specifically include now, and instead waiting until next month to provide time for those conversations to be had and some clarity sought.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's certainly open to Council to defer the item. I suppose I would stress the point that we have had this as an ongoing sort of unresolved issue for many years. It would also be open to Council to issue a notice with a far more generous completion time. That would at least formalise Council's position on the matter and make it clear that it has implemented its scheme appropriately. The issue with deferring it, albeit for a short period of time, is that we still have the issue of an unauthorised development that has not reached a conclusion in one way or another. So a short deferral could be accommodated, but I suppose I would stress that a decision needs to be made in the near future.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Following on from that line of questioning, may I, through the Mayor, ask, is it potentially possible to have a requirement that the development application and approval be completed by the 1st of September, and then you bring it back to Council to work on the timeline? In other words, we issue this particular, and it's just making the development approval process being the first timeline, and then have it come back to Council at that point in time to actually work on because that would give the timeline available to actually work out the length of works and in what process, but it also puts the wheels in motion to have a development approval process commenced as soon as possible. So you're nodding your head, so I'm assuming that's possible as well.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's certainly possible, and I suppose from a staff point of view, probably preferable to a straight deferral, as it would provide for some short-term action on the matter, and then staff would, once the application has been approved, staff would be able to bring the matter back to Council for subsequent decision making.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay then, councillors, we've got an officer recommendation. I get the impression there are a number of alternatives that may be being proposed. Councillor Hamilton?
I would like to move the officer's recommendation, but if you just give me a minute, I'll just delete the part. There is going to be amendment in there about the completion of the works, so if we have the officer's recommendation and we go that Council and put part 1, which is in accordance with clause 13.2 of Schedule 2 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulation 2075, gives the landowner of Lot 1, 223 River Street, Bassendean, Success Hill Lodge, a heritage conservation notice requiring the landowner to obtain development approval by the 1st of September 2020. And then thereafter, in point 2, thereafter administration to bring a report back to council on the works to be completed. Or do you want to include those?
Okay, so I'm
Lists
just
of
a little bit confused because my interpretation from what Mr Gibson said was that I believe you were assuming that there was still going to be the conservation notice issued with Councillor Hamilton's previous question, was that?
Oh, hang on a minute. Yes, sorry. No, I've got a heritage conservation notice in there. I've stopped it at obtain development approval, and then gone on to by the 1st of September.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in the first half.
Yeah.
And then point 2 is once that approval has been obtained, that the officers bring it back to us for an update, and then we actually allocate the timeline for the works to be completed.
Councillor Hamilton, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have removed the part about the conservation notice, which may be your intention, but is not what was originally proposed when I heard your question earlier.
Okay. Conservation. Gives the landowner, I've got, okay, second sentence goes, gives the landowner of Block 1, River Street, Bassendean, a heritage conservation notice requiring the landowner to obtain development approval by the 1st of September 2020. And then we can actually go to a point 2.
Okay. Right, how are you going over there, Amy?
Yes, I've put in to obtain development approval by 1st of September 2020, and then it goes on.
And to point 2. Now point 2,
So
I'll
that
just,
next bit's deleted.
yeah, the rest of that is deleted for the moment.
Okay.
Then we go to point 2.
Mm-hmm.
To be the council receives.
Yeah, that council receives an update to the report, receives an update reporting to council on the timeline required for completion of the following works, and then you have all those works listed underneath all those dot points that already exist down the bottom.
Mr Gibson, can I just ask you, so with what Councillor Hamilton is currently proposing, is it possible to issue a conservation notice without having a time frame? Did you have a time frame in there? Because I noticed that you're wanting to have a schedule of a timeline come back to us, but you're also wanting to issue a conservation notice at this point.
Basically, it's to get the
Councillor Hamilton,
development.
can I just ask?
Yep, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So long as there's reference to the Heritage Conservation Notice and a time frame, I've noticed Councillor Hamilton is referring to the need to obtain an approval by the 1st of September. I'd suggest it's probably more reasonable that they lodge an application
Yeah.
by the 1st of September.
Yep.
Because quite simply they wouldn't be able to achieve a development approval by the 1st of September given we're now in late July. So I think it would be reasonable that they at least lodge the application by the 1st
Yep,
of
fine with
September. For the requisite works, and then there could be a part 2 that requires a subsequent report back to council, so council can consider a subsequent heritage conservation notice.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions for the wording that Councillor Hamilton has offered? Or?
Through Madam Mayor, if I could hear it again, that'd be great.
Point 1 is now a heritage conservation notice requiring the landowner to lodge an application for development approval by 1st September 2020. And then point 2, that council receives an update reporting on the timeline required for completion of the following works. And then the bullet points of the works.
The council thereafter receives a report.
Yeah. Through Madam Mayor, yes, that would work.
Okay, is everybody clear on what Councillor Hamilton is proposing? Now, Councillor Wilson, just for the information for other councillors, were you proposing a foreshadowed motion as well or not?
At the appropriate point during the debate, I shall, yes.
Well, you might want to let councillors know what their
I will at the
options
appropriate
are.
time.
Okay. Okay, so we had Councillor Hamilton move her alternative motion. Is there a seconder for the alternative motion? Councillor McWilliam. I'm assuming that there are councillors against. Councillor Hamilton, would you like to speak to your motion?
Okay. So having taken on board the deputation and the uncertainty of some of the timelines, also taking on board the report from the officers, and given that in the Bassendean community consultation, which was extensive, the community identified that heritage was of great importance to the community in this town. So we have some various interests in this room. We have the landowners, we have heritage, we have the community. We have, ultimately in the end, a unified aim. It might not seem like it at the moment, but we do. The landowners want to have their property up to scratch. They want to have a lovely place to live. The town wants to have a heritage building preserved and maintained to its utmost level. The staff have a duty of care in respect to making sure that rules and regulations are followed and carried through. So we all actually do have the same ultimate aim. What this is a process. This is a process of actually kick-starting it, getting it moving. I have no desire to actually see the landowners punished or in any sort of deep trouble financially. However, we do need to actually move on this. It is getting to the stage where the property will it'll cost more in the end if there is not some movement towards restoration of the problems. This will provide a stepping stone. It allows a report to come back to council in September or October, whenever, and then we can actually have a more informed decision about the timeline, but it is the starting point of actually making sure that we have some movement in this, and that's all that I want.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor McWilliam.
Yes, Your Worship. I support what Councillor Hamilton has just said. I'm also very importantly, I think that we're looking for not a punitive response to this, but actually a solutions focus, and I think that this is what Councillor Hamilton's motion offers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McWilliam. Councillor Wilson, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Your Worship. I rise to speak against the motion moved by Councillor Hamilton and seconded by Councillor McWilliam, and foreshadow that should the motion be lost, that I'd be moving an alternative motion, and the alternative motion that I would move would be that item 12.2 be deferred to allow town staff and the owners of 1 River Street time to enter into discussions towards works towards an agreed schedule of works and timetable to be presented back to council at a later time. There are many reasons that I do so. The first is I take councillors to page 12 of our agenda, the first stop point under Heritage Conservation Notice, where it quite plainly reads, if the local government forms a view that a heritage place is not being properly managed, the local government may, not shall, not must, may. It is entirely within our discretion if we do this or not. There is no compunction upon us to issue one of these notices just because staff recommend that we should. I then also take councillors to page 13 of the agenda, the last paragraph of the conclusion, setting it is open to council to not issue the Heritage Conservation Notice. So staff have quite clearly explained to us that it is well within our rights not to issue a notice to compel the owners of this property to undertake works, to enter into a process which could expose them to fines and all sorts of horrible consequences for their life situation. I have my own personal reasons too, which is if weighing up the relative merits of the well-being of a pile of bricks and the relative merits of the well-being of a family of humans, I'm going to choose humans every single time. I understand that some people have nostalgia for old buildings. I get that, and I imagine the owners probably also have nostalgia for old buildings too, which would have formed the basis for why they chose to purchase the property in the first place. But what I am never going to do is vote to encumber the owners of a building about which they have nostalgic feelings with massive costs and the potential to be exposed to fines just because there is a body of works that they would like to do that is beyond their means currently. I think it would be manifestly unfair for us to go out of our way to encumber these good and decent people who have found themselves in a hard situation with a compulsive program underneath an act which will, as they have explained, lead to financial ruin for them. And I would implore councillors to vote the motion down and to consider the alternative motion instead.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Is there anybody who would like to speak for the motion or against the motion? Councillor Ganger?
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting Councillor Wilson's alternative motion, should this not get up, and support what he has said. As we well know, the town, in fact, has a heritage place just down the road that we have come across significant hurdles over a number of years. In fact, I've been on council since 2005. We're now in 2020, and in that time, that building just down the road has been a problem building for this council. In 2020, it's still a problem building. So how we have exactly the same scenario for a family in our town that have a problem building that happens to have heritage significance, and we well know the difficulties in trying to ascertain funding, trying to bring something up to a required grade is not easy. This council has been trying for at least well over 15 years without any success. So fully support what Councillor Wilson said, and I would refer councillors to our own problems and our own crisis with our own heritage listed building just down the road. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Barty?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly to speak against the motion, the officer mentioned that the owners need to demonstrate a genuine and reasonable attempt to rectify the issues on the property. I believe in the deputation this evening the residents have demonstrated that genuine and reasonable intent to make that attempt. And I think in these difficult times that we find ourselves as a community, it's important to demonstrate where compassion where we can, and to borrow a phrase from the Avengers, Bassendean is not a place, it's a people. And I think that's something we need to demonstrate. And by deferring this motion for another month, one thing that we will also allow is the landowners the opportunity, time to get some additional clarity around the development that needs to be undertaken at their property, and clarity around what's required to be a heritage, what it means to be a heritage property owner. I can completely empathise with members of the community who enter into arenas with legislative difficulty and complexity, and I think that a government is here to serve our people, and I think Councillor Wilson's motion allows us the best opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Barty. Councillor Hamilton, do you wish to take your right and reply?
Okay. Now, I was new to council 2.5 years ago when this matter first came to council, and we moved a motion which was very generous, and we asked the staff to provide assistance, which they did. I don't think that what I'm proposing is negative. I think it simply is pressing the start button and say we need something. We need to have something to move forward. It is simply asking for the application to be lodged by the 1st of September. As very grateful to the staff for their suggestions. That will then allow the staff to work with the landowners to provide guidance, and then the staff will come back with a report, and it's at that point that we will look at the staff report and the timelines. So I don't see this as being punitive. It's not actually imposing any huge fines as bandied about this room previously. All that's required is a development application to be lodged by the 1st of September. Not approval, an application. So, and this is giving some certainty in a direction forward. It is not actually saying that you have to do XYZ a veranda by such and such time. It is saying you have to put in an application to show that you are genuinely going to move forward on this. Now, we have heritage buildings in the town, and I will take on board comments made by Councillor Gangel. I would dispute some of them in that there has been works done on that heritage property over 15 years, and they have been done to Heritage Council standards. That is the cottage, you know what I'm talking about. The council have endeavoured in all aspects, and this is a new council compared to old councils from decades ago. We have moved forward as much as we can in many areas to try and redress some of the problems of the past. And if we can do that, then we can ask the same of people in our community. Our community are valuable to us, and our people are valuable to us. And I would sincerely hope that with a collaborative approach between staff, council and the landowners, that we can actually end up with a positive outcome. But it has to start somewhere. We can't just leave this forever. 2.5 years ago, I sat here and we voted to leave it. And here we are again.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Okay, Councillor, so we need to vote on the motion put forward by Councillor Hamilton. So can I have all those in favour of the motion? Of Councillor Hamilton and McWilliam. All those against? Councillor Wilson, Barty, Gangel and McLennan. So that is lost. Councillor Wilson, would you like to put forward your motion?
Thank you, Worship. As foreshadowed, that item 12.2 be deferred to allow town staff and the owners of 1 River Street to enter into discussions to work towards an agreed schedule of works and timetable to be presented back to Council at a later time.
Can I just ask Mr Gibson, Councillor Wilson hasn't put a time frame around that, just to come back at some time in the future. Would you be supportive of there being a time frame attached or leaving it open?
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly support the attachment of a time frame. I know the staff will be asked to work towards an agreement with the landowner, which may or may not be possible, but I think it would be prudent to attach a time frame that if negotiations were proceeding as hoped, staff will prepare a report back to council at that stage.
And would you have any suggestions about what an appropriate time frame might be?
Potentially by the October meeting, perhaps.
Councillor Wilson? Would you be willing to include a time frame in your motion?
For the report of council staff back to council? Yes, yeah, I think October is reasonable. So the motion would end then to for the report to be presented back to council at the October 2020 meeting.
Amy, could you please read that back out to councillors when you're ready?
I have a gap.
In the meantime, can I ask a question of staff?
Yes.
Okay, so through the Mayor, can I ask a question of the staff? If the report comes back in October and there's been no movement, no discussion, it would then be open to council to issue the... Okay, thank you.
And it would also be open to council if they had that discussion to implement the notice to ensure that the works that were agreed to were carried out in the timeframes that were discussed, yeah? Councillor Hamilton.
That item 12.2 be deferred to allow town staff and the owners of 1 River Street, Bassendean, time to enter into discussions to work towards an agreed schedule of works and timetable to be presented to council at the October ordinary council meeting.
Okay, so Councillor Wilson has moved that motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Barty has seconded. Is anybody against? Do we need to debate this? Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? So that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you. Okay, so we might now skip down to item 12.13, which is the adoption of the budget, just so that people are fresh while we consider this item, and then we'll come back to the earlier reports after we've dealt with the budget. So this is item 12.13. First of all, are there any questions? Thank you, Ivy and Riley, for being here this evening. I'm sure the town staff will be in contact over the coming week. Okay, question was that, sorry, Councillor Ganger?
Yes, thank you, Worship. My question is in relating to something that was omitted from the budget, and that's the potential lighting upgrade at Steel Blue Oval, Bassendean. I'm just wondering, does the town know what current lux the current lighting is at the Steel Blue Oval, Bassendean?
Mr Adams, do you have that information at hand?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. My recollection is that it's about 20 lux.
Yep.
It's down to about 20
Yeah,
lux. It does
thank
that.
you. Further to that, what is the Australian grade for training for the lux at a sporting field? I believe it will be about 100 lux for training. My further question then is, and thank you for advising that ordinarily it is 30 lux. We are down to about 20 lux at Steel Blue Oval, which is a massive danger. Now I'm just wondering, what is the cost repairs that the town would have to pay to get that up to the whole 30 lux that it can currently handle?
Councillor Ganger, can I suggest that you provide the staff with more time for these questions in future so they can research the information for
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a subjective question. Through the chair, though, Madam Mayor, the estimate to bring it up to 100 lux is about $450,000.
No, just bring it up to the 30 lux. So at the moment it's 20.
I understand the question. Thanks. So to bring it up to 30 lux would need further analysis. I'm not sure whether the poles would be up to standard. I know there's an issue with the poles, but it would be. It's not. It wouldn't be a third of the 100 lux.
No, it's about.
So it would still require significant infrastructure upgrade.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from councillors? Councillor Hamilton?
Just a question of the CEO, through the Mayor. The footpath allocations for several footpaths line items, we discussed the potential for those to be explored in a workshop in the future before any works are completed or started. So that is the direction we'll be taking with those.
Yes, we've currently got that scheduled for a September concept workshop with councillors.
Okay. So my question is, if during that workshop we decide that, you know, one or two of those that have been nominated in the budget are not going to go ahead, then that's fine. That budget allocation can be used for something else, correct?
Exactly.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, councillors, if there's no further questions, I'm happy to move the officer recommendation, and then if there are any amendments that councillors would like to make, we can deal with them individually as we go through. So to get the ball rolling, is there somebody who's happy to second the officer recommendation for the budget this time? Councillor Wilson's happy to second. Okay. Are there any amendments that councillors want to propose before we proceed any further? Councillor Ganjo?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I know I'll probably be unlucky with this one, but I would like to propose that that we include the 150,000 contribution for the upgrading of lighting at Still Blue Oval, Bassendean, and in order to achieve that, my suggestion is one of two things. Considering we're looking at the sale of 2 blocks to contribute to the playground at Sandy Beach, either taking it out of the allocation that's been given to Sandy Beach, given they will get that and more back once the 2 blocks are sold, or alternatively look at reducing the tree fund for this coming year to fund the 150,000.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ganjo. So the amendment is to include $150,000 for the lighting at Swan districts and take the get those funds either from the tree budget or from the sale of the lots.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
Okay, is there a seconder for Councillor Ganjo's amendment? Okay, sorry, Councillor Ganjo, that is lost. Are there any other amendments councillors would like to make? Well, you guys are wonderful. Okay, so in that case, we'll put the budget to the vote. Is there anybody against the budget? Councillor Ganjo? Okay. I will very briefly speak to the budget. First of all, I'd just like to thank particularly Paul White and Diane for your work on the budget over many months. I know it's been particularly challenging, COVID situation, but also working with the systems we currently have in place. So thank you very much for your efforts. As councils would be aware, this process started many months ago, and partway through COVID hit, so it's been made even more challenging. I think that this budget responds to the challenges that our community faces by not increasing our rates revenue compared to last year, so that we not only have enough income to provide the services that our community needs, but also doesn't increase the financial burden on our ratepayers. I'm conscious that there's been revaluation this year, which means that not everybody will receive exactly the same rates notice as previously. However, the rates distribution is being shared or is being reallocated in alignment with the GRB, which is the normal process. And I'm pleased that about 2/3 of our residential dwellings will have a slight decrease in their rates this year. There has needed to be some rationalisation of the projects that we deliver, and I know that councillors have considered these very carefully and have tried to deliver projects that are going to deliver the best outcomes for our community, not only this year but into the future. And that is what we need to consider as well as this year, as the long-term implications of the decisions we make around the budget. I do appreciate all the input that councillors have had over many workshops in the preceding months. I think there's been a lot of opportunity to provide input, and I'm pleased that we come to this point and there's minimal need for us to deal with amendments, because we have had the time to, as a group, discuss what the priorities are. And I'm confident that this budget will deliver projects and services to our community that will best serve them in the coming years. So thank you everybody, and thank you to the staff. I lost track of who seconded that. Was that you, Councillor Wilson? Would you like to speak to the budget?
Thank you, Your Worship. It has been a difficult and challenging year for governments of all flavours, state, Commonwealth and indeed local governments. In seconding the Mayor's motion to adopt the budget, I'd also like to pass on our thanks and congratulations to the Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council for their contribution this year, both in terms of the dividend that was returned to our member council to help us with some of our project costs, and also the payments that were made by the MRC to the town of Bassendean to help us roll out the FOGO in the system. And coincidentally, I received my new FOGO bins just today, which has been great to see that our town staff have been able to deliver such a large program during a difficult time, and my thanks and congratulations go to all involved. Whilst I personally don't agree with every single line item within this budget, I think it is certainly fair to say that the budget does reflect the majority view of council in all regards, and for that reason I'm happy to second the motion and recommend that council adopt the budget. I'd also just, in closing, like to pick up on the point that the Mayor made about the government's decision to introduce the new gross rental values partway through this process. We had previously resolved to keep rates unchanged and to pass on a 0% rate revenue increase to our ratepayers. Had the state government decided not to pass on the changes to the GRV, it would have been possible for us to ensure that all ratepayers' rates remain the same. To the extent that some individual ratepayers' rates will go up, that is regrettable, but that is the consequence of a decision of the state government, and any concerns that people might have in that regard are properly directed to the state government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Ganjo.
Thank you, Worship. Look, although I am speaking against the budget, as there are items I would like to raise, I will ultimately support the budget. I believe you should support the operating of the town. But first issue which I raised previously is the lighting at Steel Blue Oval Bassendean. This lighting is severely a danger at 20 lux. The minimum is 100 lux. Now, for the 150,000 that the town would have contributed to this much required, much needed lighting upgrade, the town would have got back in excess of $600,000 worth of investment, as through the state government there's additional funds for lighting and turf upgrades for waffle grounds. There's also an additional $40,000 that would have been provided from the AFL and $150,000 from the Swans Junior Football Region. So therefore about $640,000 could have been spent to upgrade the lights, which could have taken them up to, from the maximum we've got now, from 30 to 300, which would then be capable for night matches, which would then be able to vitalise that area in the summer. Again, I am deeply concerned that we're missing out on this grant. This is another grant that the town is passing up. You look, we gave back the, I think it was about 20,000 to memory for the grant at Pickering Park to do the look at the boat ramp. Potentially 375 to Lotteries West, we're potentially going to be handing back as well. We also had a lighting audit a few years ago that obviously would have told us the exact condition of the poles and the like at the Swan District's football oval that we're not aware of at the moment, that we subsequently did not decide to do. Through this process, the rates increase to the Swan District's football club will increase through the rates tonight about 40%. On last year. There will be a couple of increases of over $30,000 in rates. 6 properties will have increases between $2,000 and $6,000, and of course 77 properties will have increases of over $1,000. Obviously this is regrettable and very concerning, especially in the current climate that we're in, and businesses are finding it very, very difficult to keep afloat. Also, the reliance on reserve funds is also concerning, but I do thank the staff for their efforts. I understand and appreciate how very difficult it has been to pull together this budget tonight. I thank you for your work and bringing something forward, and overall I think it's a positive budget, except for the few areas that I've just highlighted there. But having said that, I will ultimately be supporting the budget because I support the town being able to function year in, year out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ganjo. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to the budget? Okay, in that case, I'll just quickly respond to a couple of Councillor Ganjo's comments. I appreciate your passion for supporting the Swan District's Football Club, Councillor Ganjo. But as I mentioned earlier, there were a number of difficult decisions that needed to be made this year in light of the COVID pandemic and the impact on the town's budget. You mentioned the giving up of grants, but I would also draw your attention that in order to receive these grants, it requires a significant co-contribution from the town. So it's not just a matter of putting your hand out for money, it also requires the town committing money. The lighting at Saunders Football Club is below the 100 lux that you mentioned. However, there's, as you know, there's ongoing discussion with Swan District's Football Club regarding redevelopment of the football facilities, and as provided in comment from the CEO earlier this week, it would be untimely for us to install new lighting at this point, considering that we don't have a definitive plan for the football facilities, which potentially could include realignment of the oval, and this expenditure could therefore would need to be repeated and the works redone. In regards to the comments about the increase in rates for some of the properties in our town, that is accurate. However, as I mentioned earlier, the gross rental value, the revaluation has been undertaken this year, or has been applied this year. It means that there are some properties whose values have gone down and they will have less of the burden of the rates, and those that have gone up or have decreased less than the average will have an increase in the rates that they pay this year. But that is the standard process that all the local governments use for determining rates. So those who have had an increase in rates, it means that they will benefit from having less of a reduction in their property value, which is a good thing ultimately. But I do appreciate councillors being supportive of the budget, and as has been pointed out, not everybody is in agreement with all of the items that have been included in the budget, but it is a reflection of the combined priorities and of the community. So thank you everybody, and once again thank you to the staff. So put the budget to the vote. So all those councillors in favour of supporting the budget, that is carried unanimously. Thank you everybody. We will now go back to item 12.3, which is the revocation of council policies relating to fire risk management and graffiti. Are there any questions? In that case, do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Barty, is there a seconder? Councillor Wilson, is there anybody against? Okay, so that is carried. Councillor Hampton, would you like to come up to the front to deal with item 12.4 that I have proximity interest in, please?
Big shoes to fill.
Still hiding myself here. Thank you. Okay, councillors, moving on to 12.4, draft amended local planning policy number 11, Anzac Terrace design guidelines, final adoption. So, first of all, are there any questions regarding this item? No? Do we have a mover for this item? Councillor Wilson. Seconder? Councillor McWilliam. Anyone against? I declare that carried. Thank you. We invite the Mayor back in. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. So, item 12.5, which was the industrial zone design guidelines, has been withdrawn. So we'll move on to 12.6, which is the proposed council policy relating to street trees. Any questions? If not, do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? No mover? Councillor Wilson, is there a seconder? I'm happy to second it. Is there anybody against? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. 12.7, the Town of Bassendean Compassionate Waste Services Guidelines. Any questions? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. During the workshop, I asked a question about some of the other categories of compassion that the town might apply to waste services, specifically in relation to people who are referred to as hoarders, known as avid and enthusiastic collectors. Just wondering if staff have had an opportunity to further consider the policy since the briefing to see if there's any merit in expanding the policy to include waived fees when the town compulsorily acquires people's property and forces them to throw it
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Look, at this stage, I guess the purpose behind this particular policy that was put up was just to support the FOGO rollout, which was looking at medical waste particularly, and the addition of the deceased estates element was added on. What staff had intended to do was to step away and then look at that particular matter by itself and on its own merits. In saying that, it's also something that you could add as an amendment as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. In that case, we have an officer recommendation. Councillor Hunt.
Move it.
Moving the officer recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor McWilliam. Is there anybody against? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 12.10, the amended notices of motion policy. I'm happy to move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Barty. Anybody against? Councillor Hamilton. Okay, I'm not going to debate this because the policy just reflects the local law. Okay, so let's put that to the vote. All councillors in favour? So that is Councillor Wilson, Barty, Ganja, McWilliam and McLennan for. Councillor Hamilton against. That is carried. Councillors, 12.12, the Town of Bassendean Community Strategic Plan. Any questions? Hopefully everyone's very familiar with it. We've spent a lot of time discussing this and consulting with our community.
Sorry,
Councillor Ganja?
sorry, Your Worship. Just 12.11, was that not required to come out of en bloc because of absolute majority?
Well, if it was, we did not pick
Okay.
up on that earlier.
That's all right.
Councillor Ganja.
It doesn't cost money.
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. Yep.
We had an absolute majority of the
Fine.
en bloc,
Yep.
so we're fine. So, do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor McWilliam, seconded Councillor Wilson. Is there anybody against? That is carried unanimously. 12.14, this is the RFT for provision of turf maintenance for our sporting reserves. Do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Barty, seconded Councillor Hamilton. Is there anybody against? That is carried unanimously. 12.16, the quarterly report. Councillor Hamilton, I believe you had a question.
Yes. Just a few questions. Page 58, 58 of the attachment. You've got public area dogs on lead. This project is currently on hold pending further investigation and advice. Existing signage will be updated on a like-for-like basis where necessary. So how long are you looking at on hold for that?
Effectively, we're still looking at upgrading the signage, but what we were suggesting is that the provisions for on-lead, off-lead would not change. Is that correct, Mr Gibson?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. We're in the process of replacing signs at the moment, only new for old, and they're signs we already had at the depot. So we're not purchasing new signs, we're just making use of the ones we already have.
Okay, I was just curious how long it was going to take. Okay, page 81. I would just point out to the CEO, just as a comment, that the third last thing says the town's annual pruning program. So it seems to intimate that the program, there was another one somewhere else that's only done once a year, but just bringing that to your attention, given some correspondence that we had today. But it's a minor thing, okay. Page 90 I've already brought to your attention, which was the bottom line that says the capital football works completed included Mickleton Terrace, but I brought that to your attention earlier. So I'll let you deal with that. The next page, 91, halfway down, it's got the town has implemented a new verge permit, which will provide greater street tree protection. I'm assuming this relates to development applications, does it? Maybe? It's got service program, engineering roadworks. verge permit, just, okay.
Maybe the staff can follow up on that one for
Yeah,
you later in
it's,
the week,
it's
Councillor
again,
Ashton.
it's a minor thing. I wasn't sure that we needed verge permits, but I will leave that. That's in your department, I think, Mr. Adams. It's under engineering and on page 104, it says that the CMC resolved to adopt a new project charter format. I was just looking at that for a bit of clarity. Again, this can come.
Yeah, I think we've agreed that we're going to have a workshop soon. That's
Yeah.
one of the things
Okay.
we've included.
Good, that's the gist of my question. Then we have the resolutions. Now, some of these resolutions, I just want some clarity, but they probably can be deleted, but I just want some clarity on them. ROC 18.
Which page are you on, Councillor Hamilton?
Interesting.
129.
Sorry, the print very
Small.
tiny. 6, 2. Okay, it is no page number. It is the 4th page along, and it's Phil Adams is the officer. It's ROC 18-62196. Now this is a really long resolution, and it has quite a lot of things, but the only thing mentioned in resolving this is the Palmerston Reserve consultation and the budget consideration, blah, blah, blah. But there are a whole host of other things in there. My curiosity is, how does the organisation embed some of these aspirations into our organisation when the resolution, so it's got 70% tree canopy aspiration, which is a part of the resolution. There's things like that, and I'm curious about how that information becomes embedded in the organisation once a resolution is deleted, because it's not mentioned in some of the other aspects.
Thanks, Councillor. Through the chair, I think if you went back through previous reports, you'll find that all of that is embedded and reported on. When resolutions like this are written, it is very challenging to try and address every single item. In my view, from the previous quarterly report, all of the previous items were covered, and this was the last item within that resolution to be covered. I would have thought that council and staff would be quite comfortable that the street tree planting program, which is now embedded within the town, is embedded, and we're proceeding down that path.
Okay, I wasn't questioning the program, just I have faith in your department doing that. Wasn't questioning that at all. I think what I'm getting at is, like, we have a 70% tree canopy target, which we have resolved. That's what we want. So an example would be, how do we get an annual report providing the outcomes of those programs? What's the survival rate? Are we actually getting close to achieving that? These are the types of questions that I would ask of how council gets feedback on the success rate of these, and how are we getting to those resolutions? Are we getting close? Are we moving fast? Are we going backwards? That's the comment I'd make. So probably this is the wrong forum to bring that up, but these are the questions I have as a councillor.
There's probably a couple of comments I'd like to make. One in regards to the tree program. So this winter's tree program, I think we're 3/4 of the way through planting 1,000 trees across the town of Bassendean, and I'd like to arrange a session with councillors this is the first year, obviously we've planted so many trees, lessons learnt, etc. Some of the things we could do better, some of the challenges along the way. But I guess that gives us that sort of post-program evaluation. But in terms of our strategic community plan, we've just set the direction for the town. We've just talked about the things that are important for our community, and we've also identified some strategic measures within the SCP. So you know, if there are some sub-measures within that, so we have a whole area on sustainability and environment, so looking at some real tangible measures that enable council to see the shift and improvements that we achieve over time. Now, the previous SCP, the measures were never embedded in the organisation. We now have a brand new SCP, and a part of implementing and embedding that is developing those strategic measures and making sure that we have very clear counting rules and everybody's aware what's in, what's out, and we regularly measure the shift. So we can demonstrate how we improve on the environment, sustainability, tree planting, etc.
Okay, that's fine. So that's fine for deletion. There are two others that are sort of joined together at the hip, which probably fall into the arena of Mr. Ma. Sorry. It's ROC 18588025. It relates to a fairly old resolution
So
that
that's
is
on
European house borers.
Page 370 of the attachments. Yep.
My hard copy doesn't have page numbers on it, so
that's,
it's the third last page. But there's another one further down, which is on the second last page, ROC 1887784. Now, both of those relate to European house borers, and I just wanted to check. It's indicated that annual dead wooding is happening. So, is that happening? Because they're very large trees, and I'm not sure that you actually have that program on an annual basis yet. So.
Thank you, Councillor. So there is an annual deadwooding program, and some of that has occurred a little bit late this year, just in I guess, taking on the program and so forth. But I understand that all the trees that have been identified as needing to be deadwooded are deadwooded. In saying that, that'll be one of the things we'll look at a review for the next year as well.
And may I also ask, because I believe you are now attending EMRC as one of our representatives. Okay, there was a part of one of those resolutions was that the EMRC through the collection of Eastern Metropolitan Regional Councils would look at collaboration in trying to stop the spread of European house borer. So that's another thing that was in one of those motions as well. But in any case, I'm satisfied for all of those to be deleted.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Okay, then do we have a mover for the quarterly report? Councillor Vardy, seconded Councillor Wilson. Is there anybody against? That is carried unanimously. 1219, which is the financial statements. Do we have a mover for the motion? I'm happy to move it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Anybody against? That's carried unanimously. The calendar at 1221, there was just a minor amendment to be made. In the calendar, it references the location for the Audit and Governance Committee being in the Council Chambers, but there's been a discussion and the presiding member has agreed to have that meeting online. So I'm happy to move the calendar. That's correct, isn't it, Councillor McWilliam?
Sorry. Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
You just looked at me and I thought, oh gee. So I'm happy to move that officer recommendation with the amendment. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hamilton. Anybody against? Councillor Ganjar.
Don't need a debate. We all know my reasons.
Okay.
Such a wonderful chamber we have now too.
Okay, so Councillor Wilson, Barty, Hamilton, McWilliam and McLennan for the motion and Councillor Ganjar against. That is carried. 13.1, which is the notice of motion from myself in relation to the Prevent Support Heal campaign. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Wilson. Is there anybody against? That's carried unanimously. So councillors, now we're moving on to confident. Oh, hold on. No, we're not. First of all, are there any announcements of motion for the next meeting? There's no urgent business, so in that case, do I have a mover to go behind closed doors to consider confidential business? Councillor Wilson moved. Councillor Vardy seconded. Anybody against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Deanie, would you mind closing the door?